Okay, good morning, everybody. We're just logging in. We seem to have to do name changes every day. So Mr. Anderson or Mr. Woldridge, Tim Terry should become Robert Moore, and Garrick Juji should become Peter Leffler.
And I see that Mr. Durbin is trying to connect with that phone number, Mr.
Right.
Newell.
So also 571-8166 should be changed to Tim Durbin when it connects. We'll get there. So just a moment and we'll get started. Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. So good morning, everybody. My name is Alan Lilly. I'm the presiding hearing officer of the State Water Resource Control Board's Administrative Hearing Office. Today is October 27, 2022. It's just after 9 a.m. And this is the second day of hearings in the AHO's proceeding in the court's reference to the State Water Resources Control Board in City of Marina versus RMC Lonestar. I'm not going to ask for appearances this morning unless it appears that everybody who is here today was here yesterday. I don't see any changes. So unless there's anybody new, is anybody new appearing today who was not here yesterday? I didn't think so. So we can just go ahead and get started. Okay, so just a couple of quick housekeeping matters. We received uploads of the transcript of the second day of Leffler deposition and the transcript of the Crooks deposition, and we have moved those over to the folder on the AHO FTP folder, within the AHO FTP folder where everyone can access them. So those depo transcripts are now available to all parties. We also received revised deposition exhibits 43 and 44, which I think were used during the Leffler deposition. So we labeled those as revised depo exhibits and have uploaded them to the deposition exhibits folder. We left in the original exhibits 43 and 44 in case there's some question about that. And then we received a new document from Cal-Am, which we've labeled as Exhibit Cal-Am 105, which we've added to the Cal-Am exhibit folder. And again, I'm not ruling on the admissibility of that exhibit, but we just have that in the folder where it's accessible to everyone else. So are there any other preliminary matters before we just dive into the cross-examination this morning? Yes, Mr. Neudecker, your hand is up. Go ahead. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Just a housekeeping matter related to the site visit.
Okay.
I don't think anyone was planning to violate, or I don't think anyone was planning to wear shorts and flip-flops, but just in case, I'm told no open-toed shoes and no shorts. Also, because this is a federally regulated mine site, before anyone can go on the property, there's going to be like a 10-minute safety/security meeting or seminar where someone's going to go over what you can and can't do on the property. What to do if you see something, stuff like that. So we should bake that into the plan when we get to the CEMEX site. And then
Okay.
lastly, I'm told that the PPE folks need to wear is hard hats and vests. And CEMEX didn't have enough for everybody, so they went out and bought more for the 15 people that we told them are showing up. So there can't be any last minute additions to the list. I mean, if anybody else is planning to come, we need to know now, because if more than 15 people show up, there won't be enough hard hats and vests to go around.
Okay, so if anybody who has not previously advised the AHO that they're planning to attend now wants to attend, or basically if there are any increases in numbers, please shoot an email to me with CC to the service list, and we will follow up. And Mr. Newdecker, please pass on to CEMEX. We appreciate their preparations for this. And of course, we will scrupulously follow all their safety requirements, and everybody should pay serious attention during the safety and security meeting. I take that stuff very seriously, as we all should. So thank you. Anything else on that, Mr. Newdecker?
No.
All right, thank you.
Thank
all right,
you.
Mr. Wilkins, your electronic hand is up. Go ahead.
I think Mr. Moore may have jumped in ahead of me, but I'm fine waiting or going now.
Go ahead.
Well, if Mr. Moore wants to go first, go ahead. I'm sorry, it's just where the tiles are. Go ahead, Mr. Moore.
All right, fine. I have what I consider either a request or an announcement. We would like, Theodore Ash is one of their experts. I think they're putting him on next week. Obviously, he for a direct examination. We would like to save or reserve the cross-examination until their other experts are testifying. So we have a full panel of experts instead of one expert out here and then the other panel 3 or 4 weeks later. So that's my request.
Okay. And Mr. Moore, I will think about that, but I'm going to tell you right now, my plan is to deny that request. I think Mr. Ash's testimony is sufficiently separate. I mean, he's not a modeler. The others were modelers. We reserved them for December because they wanted to have time. They asked for time to review the 2022 modeling work done by Dr. Ye. Mr. Ash is testifying about the AEM surveys and studies. I think that's separate. And I think from my point of view, I would rather have the cross-examination follow immediately after the direct. Now, having said that, I do ask that Marina Coast Water District make sure that Mr. Ash is available in December so that if there are any follow-up questions for him that come up because of the testimony of the other two experts, I believe it's Nelson and Kincaid, then you can circle back just for that limited purpose. But otherwise, I'd like to proceed with the Ash cross-examination on Monday.
That's fine. Thank you.
But yeah, thank you. So with that caveat, and now Mr. Wilkins, go ahead.
Yeah, on the issue of Mr. Ash, he's obviously prepared to go forward on Monday, and we intend to present him on Monday. Because of the work he does, he needs to travel, and he's out in the field for his type of AEM surveys. So if there's a particular day that we want to reserve for him, and I don't know that he's available at this point in time, because we asked him obviously to hold this period of time, I would need to ask him in advance. So do we know when specifically you want me to ask him, and then I can find out if he's going to be available or he's planning to be in the field at that point in time, is I guess my
Okay,
question.
well, what we were targeting is December 7 through 9 for the examination of Marina Coast's other experts. So ask him if he would be available in that, will be available in that time frame of December 7 through 9.
Okay, I will do that.
Okay.
I'll be able to report that on Monday.
Yeah, and that should be fine. I'm Mr. Moore, and I think Mr. Moore understands this. My ruling is that most or potentially all of the cross-examination of Mr. Ash should occur next week on Monday and Tuesday. And it would only be if some question came up through the testimony of Nelson and Kincaid. I think those are the only 2 experts from Marina Coast who will be in December. That's somehow related back to ash. Then I'd like to have them available for that, but that should be at most just a few questions. But anyway, Mr. Wilkins, see if you can find out when he's available in those 3 days, and we'll try to work it through that way.
I will do that. And so, and my question to you was, you originally said that cross-examination was limited to 2 hours for Marina Coast and 2 hours for the city. I have worked with Mr. Brochard on doing our cross-examination for the witnesses here, and we have more than 2 hours of questions. And so my question to you now is, we think we can get it done within a total of 3 hours. Obviously we don't know that because it'll depend on how long the answers take. But can we assume that we will have that amount of time, or do I need to stop my questioning of the other witnesses so Mr. Brochard will have time to cross-examine the witness he's planning to cross-examine?
Okay, well, thank you for raising that now. So why don't you just tell me, let's have a little more roadmap here. Which witnesses are you going to cross-examine, and which witnesses is Mr. Brochard going to cross-examine?
I'm planning to cross-examine Mr. Durbin and Mr. Leffler in the same order they were presented yesterday. And my gut is that it's going to be about 2 hours by the time I finish with them, which means that Mr. Brochard would not have any time left to cross-examine Mr. Ye, and I don't want to do that.
All right, so Mr. Brochard, what's your estimated time for Ye then?
I'm going to try very hard to do it in an hour, but Dr. Ye's deposition was lengthy. The back and forth was lengthy with some of the answers, so I don't know how efficient it's going to be. I'm going to try and do it as quickly as I can and use the deposition transcript as much as I can to move it along. So I'm hopeful for an hour. Okay,
well, and I understand you don't know exactly how that will go.
Mr.
Okay, so
respond, or Mr. Moore, or I respond.
Wait. Let me first ask City Marina for their time estimates, and then you can respond to all of it. I think that'll be more efficient. So, City of,
sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Mr. Lilly, I would just also like to add that I've spoken with the attorneys for the City of Marina also, and I've tried to give some of the topics that we've tried to split them up a little bit so that we're not covering the same ground. That's part of the way I've tried to reduce the time.
Good. Well, I appreciate that coordination. So for City of Marina, Mr. Spalding or Ms. Eisenheimer, what are your time estimates? Who's going to cross-examine which witnesses, and what are your time estimates?
Good morning, Mr. Lilly. I'll be cross-examining Mr. Durbin and Dr. Ye. And again, it's always a little hard to predict, but my hope is that will take approximately 1 hour total for the 2 of them.
Okay. And then Mr. Spalding, I assume you have Mr. Leffler.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Lilly. I have Mr. Leffler, and I think an hour is what I need.
Okay. All right. So now, Mr. Betts, you wanted to respond. Go ahead.
Sure. So, Mr. Moore, may I, or do you wish to?
Yeah, go ahead, Michael, please.
So,
you guys have been overruling each other, so try to be a little more. I'm sorry. It's giving you a hard time. Go ahead.
A little
Mr.
coordinated. That's all.
sure. It starts with the 40,000 foot issue that we've addressed. Many of these issues have been addressed and resolved over the years. And then we came before you, Mr. Lilly, and you set some orders early on prescribing what we're supposed to do in our direct examinations, written direct examinations, rebuttal exams, and you even had some initial timeframes, 5 minutes for openings. I think it was 15 minutes for direct, maybe 30 minutes for cross-examination. And we took you to heart, and we prepared our case over the last several months accordingly. We laid out everything in our direct exams. We laid out everything in our rebuttals. We prepared our slides to make sure we met your timeframes. Yesterday, as you noticed, we hit the 60 minutes on the nose. I can assure you, each of our witnesses wanted to.
Sorry, somebody needs to go on mute. Whoever 916-607-8660 is, we're hearing you, and I don't think you want us to hear you.
I suspect that was Mr. Durbin's cell phone that he's using for audio.
Okay, it went on mute, so we're good. Excuse us, Mr. Betts. Go ahead.
No problem. So we played by these rules. And again, we would have altered our case. We may have had more slides. We may have put on more time. But to have more time now for cross-examination than you initially allowed, the order of proof, I'm not refighting that. But again, we think this is their burden, their motion to reconsider. But now we have a spread out hearing where we're putting everything out first, and then they get to go in December. But I think the expansion of the rules on their side each time is prejudicial. And we've prepared our case. We listened to you very carefully throughout this entire case about what you wanted. I think you may have, maybe I'm wrong, made statements about how depositions aren't as important. There's no gotchas. So we played by the rules, and we could have done things different. We really probably wanted to have done things different, but we think it's unfair to expand. Like, this would be the second time beyond the 30 minutes you initially said to now say that we're doing things in 3 or 4 hours when we've played by the rules the entire time. So that's our comment. You know, Mr. Moore or others, I'm not sure if you wish to join, but I think it's really getting too much at this point.
Well, I would just add arithmetic. I think, Mr. Lilly, if the math is right, they've now asked for 6 hours today when they had 2 hours and 50 minutes left.
Yeah, okay. Well, I can do the math too. I think basically each City of Marina and Marina Coast are each asking for 1 hour more than the original allotment, roughly. So let me just clarify 2 things. First of all, I do understand your concern, Mr. Betts, but I'm looking at my pre-hearing conference order from October 21st of 2022 on page 3. And it states, for good cause shown, I may extend the time limits for cross-examination if I believe the party's initial cross-examination has been as efficient as possible and the party presents a legitimate proposal for the subjects and estimated times for additional cross-examination. So the prior time limits were certainly my goals, but they were not cast in stone. I think I was pretty clear about that. So the other thing is, well, let me finish up that train of thought. So I heard the summaries of the direct yesterday, and I've gone over most of the exhibits, I think, certainly all the technical memoranda, and this is pretty darn complicated stuff. So I think probably Marina Coast will be able to demonstrate good cause for an extra hour, but I think you're right, Mr. Betts, I should follow my own orders, and my own order does say for good cause, and they haven't shown it yet, although I think they will. So I'm going to go ahead and allow Mr. Wilkins to proceed. He's the first one up today for cross-examination, and we'll see where we are. We'll keep track of the time. But if I think he's been efficient with his cross-ex of Mr. Durbin and Mr. Loeffler, I'll just say I'm inclined to allow another hour for Mr. Brochard to cross-examine Dr. Ye. And then similarly, when we get to City of Marina, we'll see where we are. City of Marina has just over an hour left in the initial 2-hour allotment, and we'll see how efficient Ms. Meisenheimer is with her cross-ex of Durbin and Ye, and then basically an offer of proof from Mr. Spalding for what he plans to conduct with Mr. Loeffler. I do want to keep this moving along, but I also I want to make sure the parties have opportunities to bring out the important information. That's obviously the most important goal here.
Sure.
The other thing I wanted to say is, and I know there's some question about whether or not we're going to need to go into hearing tomorrow. I have been working with my technical staff, Mr. Waldridge and Ms. Graziano, and preparing our questions. And I mean, just so you know, we're not trying to prove any points for one side or the other, the way the attorneys for the parties tend to. We're just trying to figure out the details of what's going on here. And we have, I'm going to say, we're going to try to hold myself to some time limits, at least an hour and potentially 2 hours of questions for this panel of witnesses. So, and I'm pretty sure to make that go efficiently, I'm going to delay our questioning until tomorrow. So we will be going into tomorrow. So we will have time today. I do expect for City of Marina and Marina Coast to complete their cross-examination today. And with their time estimates, they should be able to. So that's my current plan for how to go forward. And to the extent it infringes on other schedules, I apologize, although this was scheduled for tomorrow as well. And frankly, my questioning is going to be more efficient as well if I have time to fully prepare it. And I'm sure I will make edits to that based on what I hear today. So anyway, that's sort of a rambling response. My plan is to go forward. So let's see, Mr. Wilkins. I certainly do expect you to complete your cross-examination in 2 hours. And then at that point, consistent with my order, I will ask Mr. Brochard to demonstrate his good cause for his proposal to cross-examine Dr. Ye for another hour. And I think that will track the order. Go ahead, Mr. Betts.
Sorry, I think you're right. We got to get going. But there's two things to consider when you consider a good cause is our compliance down to the letter of everything you've requested and laying everything out in our direct and rebuttals. And two, it's not just good cause for today, but what precipitated yesterday. They spent 50 minutes with Mr. Crooks. You'll make the determination how useful that was or not. I think we all have our opinions, but they could have spent less time yesterday if they wanted good cause for time for today. So with that, I'm ready to go.
All right. And, I don't know how things will play out in December, but I certainly will remember what I did today when it comes time for Cal-Am's attorneys, all of your cross-examination of the Marina Coast and City of Marina witnesses. And, obviously I'll try to provide equal treatment in that. So we'll see how that plays out in December, but there may be a role reversal here. It's possible. So, okay. So it's 9:25. It looks like Mr. Durbin is available from Bath still. Good morning for us. Good afternoon for you, Mr. Durbin. And Mr. Leffler is available somewhere in California, I assume, Mr. Leffler. Good morning. Reminder, you are both still under oath. And with that, Mr. Wilkins, you may proceed. And of course, we will put up exhibits and screen sharing as necessary.
All right. I'm not sure who to ask this to, but can someone at the HO's office please pull up depot exhibit number 5, please?
Yeah, you can just ask generically. It will magically appear. Okay. Ms. Mullen is probably in charge. So Ms. Mullen, please screen share depot exhibit 5. Okay, we have depot exhibit 5 on the screen. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Durbin.
Good morning to you.
Unfortunately, there we go. At your deposition, I asked you about what has been marked as depot exhibit 5 here. It was the deposition notice in this matter. Do you recall that?
Why don't you, Ms. Mullen, just scroll down so we can see the title of it. Okay, go ahead. Now you may answer the question, Mr. Durbin.
Yeah, I do recall this.
And at the deposition, you indicated prior to the deposition, you'd never seen it before and you were not asked to produce any documents for your deposition. Do you recall that?
Misstates testimony. What he recalled is also relevant.
I'm going to overrule the objection. It may refer to his depot testimony, but it does not misstate any testimony during this hearing. He has not testified about this topic during the hearing. So go ahead, Mr. Durbin, you may answer.
I did not bring any additional materials to the deposition. The only materials I've produced are those that were produced prior to my deposition.
All right. At your deposition, did you testify that you had a work file on this matter, but that you had not provided your complete file to your counsel and that your counsel had not asked you for it?
Correct.
And do you recall also testifying at your deposition last week that not all the documents you relied on in arriving at your opinions are included in the references that you produced as exhibits in this matter, and that Cal-Am had not produced them for you?
Are you referring to the references in my technical report or something else?
No, I'm referring to all the documents that you relied on in reaching your opinions in this matter.
There are certain documents that I did provide, but that I replied upon. Those are in the appendices to my expert report, but that's only part of the list of items that are in the cited references in my report.
Thank you. Do you recall also testifying that you had not provided prior versions or drafts of your written reports or opinions on this matter to which you will testify or you are testifying on, and the council had not asked them for you?
Correct.
When was the last or the most recent time you were recognized by a court as an expert in hydrogeology or modeling?
It was whenever the Seaside Basin adjudication occurred.
And who was your client in that matter?
Cal-Am.
Have you ever done any AEM modeling work before?
No.
And would you consider yourself an expert in AEM modeling?
No.
Who do you currently represent on the hydrogeological working group?
I don't think I represent anybody at this point. Previously, I represented the Salinas Valley Water Coalition.
And who's paying you currently for your work on the hydrogeological working group?
Cal-Am.
What was your understanding of your assignment in this matter?
To continue to participate on with the hydrogeologic working group.
And what were you asked to do for your direct testimony?
I was asked to update a regional groundwater model so as to provide initial conditions and boundary conditions for the North Marina model.
And is that the extent of what you were asked to do?
Yes, when you combine that with my general participation in the hydrogeologic working group.
All right. Can we pull up Cal-Am 70, please?
Okay, we'll get exhibit Cal-Am 70.
You could scroll down just so you can see the title of the document, please.
Okay, and this is Mr. Durbin, this was the written testimony you submitted for this hearing.
Correct.
Go ahead and tell us what
write-
page you want us to scroll to, Mr. Wilkins.
All right. Did you write your entire direct testimony?
Not the entire. I was provided with a template to fill out. So I did entirely write anything of a technical matter, but the boilerplating that was provided to me.
And who provided that to you?
Rob Donilon.
And how many versions of your direct testimony did you review or edit?
With respect to editing, I'm not sure what you're asking. I mean, in normal writing, I sit at the computer and write a paragraph, and maybe I don't like it and I replace it. I mean, is that what you're referring to, or?
No, I mean, not really. We all do that, obviously. What I guess I'm trying to understand is how many versions of the document did you exchange with your counsel?
One?
Does your direct testimony include all the opinions you have to offer in this matter?
Yes.
Can we pull up CalAm 73?
Okay, we'll get exhibit CalAm 73.
Do you recognize what's been shown here as exhibit 73?
I do.
And can you tell me what it is?
It's my technical memorandum on the work I did.
Was the technical memorandum peer reviewed by anyone who didn't work for geoscience?
Yes. No, I think it's only geoscience.
Okay. And did anyone from geoscience edit or ask you to edit your memorandum?
Yes.
And who was that?
Brian Villalobos suggested that the description of one of the hydrogeologic units be changed, and I think there was just one word that he thought better characterized that unit than I had used.
What was the purpose of the model that you created for this TM?
To provide initial conditions and boundary conditions for the North Marina model.
When was the model in the TM originally created?
It the last prior update was in the earliest update in the sort of general with the model in its sort of current form, I believe was in something like 2015, and then I did some additional work, maybe a couple of years later, and I might say too that I've been working on various models for many decades, and this current version of the model is simply the endpoint of that long history of working on Salinas Valley models.
Do you recall telling me at your deposition that the model that you're talking about here was originally created going back about 20 years? Does that sound right?
Yes, something like that.
And you talked about the most recent update, I think you said was around 2018 approximately. Who did you update the model for in 2018 approximately? In approximately 2018, sorry.
I didn't update in 2018. It was later than that. I don't think I started the update until late 2021 or 2022.
Okay, sorry, I think I botched that question for you. Prior to this TM, what was the last time you updated the model?
Around 2015, 15, 16, something like that.
At your deposition, you told me you updated the model for the Salinas Valley groundwater coalition. Do you recall that?
Hold on, objection,
Yes,
relevance. My issue is asking him what he remembers about his deposition is irrelevant versus simply asking the question.
I'm going to overrule that. That's a pretty technical objection, Mr. Betts. I think under our relatively informal rules of evidence in Government Code 11513, it's an appropriate question. And frankly, I think Mr. Wilkins, I mean, I'm not sure, but it appears to me that Mr. Wilkins has taken this approach to try to make this questioning go faster. So I'm going to overrule the objection. Mr. Wilkins, you may proceed.
Thank you.
And if you
So
want, Mr.
the,
Durbin, do you want him to repeat the question or do you remember it?
I remember the question. The work
Go
was
ahead.
done for the Salinas Valley Water Coalition. Just a slight correction in how you asked the question. It's Water Coalition rather than Groundwater Coalition.
Sorry. Do you recall when you updated the model for the coalition?
That was somewhere around 2015.
Okay.
It may have been a little later. I just can't remember right now.
Okay. And what was the purpose of that update?
There was a dispute between the Water Coalition and the Monterey County Water Resources Agency regarding the operation of San Antonio and Nacimiento reservoirs.
And that prior version that you did in approximately 2015 or potentially a little later, did anyone peer review that version of the model?
No.
Is it accurate to state that the hydraulic conductivities in the model development process did not involve looking at specific soil textures or material textures?
So that's the question is in a negative.
Yeah, because I asked
And
you
when you
this.
say,
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Why don't you just ask it as a positive question, or I'll ask it. Did the model development involve reviewing hydraulic conductivities of different soil types? Did I get that right, Mr. Wilkins?
Yes.
Okay.
so this is a, I'm going to try to restate your question to what I think I'm being asked. And did I do any work relating particular textures to particular hydraulic conductivities? Is that the question?
Yeah, I'll rephrase the question. Can you explain what you did to look at in terms of calculating hydraulic conductivities in your model?
Well, in the model, the hydraulic conductivities are, first of all, founded on the texture, just geographic and depth distributions of texture within the Salinas Valley groundwater basin, and also upon a relationship between depth and hydraulic conductivity, depth within the groundwater system.
And the texture map or the textures you're referring to, when did you create those?
Those were created from work that I did within the U.S. Geological Survey back in the mid-1970s regarding the Salinas Valley groundwater basin.
And did you do anything to update the texture map for your original model of hydraulic conductivities?
I did not.
Can you calibrate a texture map?
Not that I'm aware of.
Is there a discussion of the texture map in your direct testimony that you've provided in this matter?
I would have to look at my technical memorandum. I'm just not sure whether that's described or not.
Did you include anything in your direct testimony itself about the texture map?
Again, I'm not sure of the question, but let me try to answer it this way. I did provide my USGS report as an appendix to my expert report, or to my technical memorandum. And that report, the USGS report, contains a description of how in general, the texture map was created.
And have you provided the files for the model that the texture map came from to your attorneys in this matter?
No, they don't exist at this point in time.
Can you scroll to page 53 of this PDF, please?
We can do that. And just for the record, that is figure 19C in the technical memorandum, which is now displayed.
Mr. Durbin, can you explain what is shown in figure 19C?
It is a hydrograph of computed and measured groundwater levels.
And do
So
you
the
have,
time,
I'm sorry,
the
keep going.
horizontal scale is time, and the vertical scale is groundwater elevation.
And do you have an opinion whether this is a good match at this location?
At this location, first of all, the long-term trends are pretty well represented, so the ups and downs, but on my, just a second, I can't see the legend. The measured groundwater levels, which are the red, have a larger annual fluctuation than the computed.
And based on that, do you have an opinion whether this is a good match?
So out of, one of the things I think that is important here is that I think there's over 100 of these hydrographs, and this well taken as a member of that larger set indicates that there's a good match between the hydrographs and but on this particular one, as I said, there's discrepancies between the vertical and the vertical seasonal fluctuations.
Do you have an opinion on what could be causing the discrepancies between what was measured and computed at this location?
I think that most of the discrepancies are the result of uncertainty in groundwater pumping.
Could the hydraulic conductivity be one of the reasons for the discrepancies?
It could be, but I don't think it's the principal cause.
Does your TM for the 2022 model include information regarding the assumed recharge in the area of the dune sand aquifer that was used?
It did not. It did include a description of how it was calculated in general for the model.
And are there files that would would include the recharge information for your model? Do you have files that include the recharge information that's included in the TM?
Yes,
And were those produced to your council?
yes, so the ultimate numbers that went into the model were produced to council.
Is the dune sand aquifer represented in your model?
Not explicitly.
And as a result, would it be accurate to state that your model is not calibrated in the dune sand aquifer?
I don't think that's a correct statement.
Can you explain why?
There are, in amongst those 100 or so calibration wells that were used, there are wells that are perforated or screened within the dune sand aquifer.
For the aquifers in the CEMEX area, would you expect hydraulic conductivities in the submarine sediments to be similar to those that are found inland?
Generally, it's similar, yes.
Do you know if the data relating to hydraulic conductivities of the submarine sediments are included in your model? Strike that. I watched that question. Let me try that again. Do you know if there is data relating to the hydraulic conductivities of the submarine sediments that are included in your model?
No, there are not.
Does your model show where water from the proposed slant wells would come from?
No.
Based on your modeling, do you think the proposed slant well pumping will result in any increase in losses to the Salinas River?
There are some impacts on the Salinas River, correct.
Based on your modeling, do you think that the proposed slant well pumping will intercept groundwater flow that would otherwise be discharged to the Salinas River?
I think that's sort of the same question you just asked me, and there are small effects downstream from the Spreckles gauge.
Is your model too coarse to show where water from the proposed slant wells would come from?
Yes.
Do you have an opinion of plausible sources of where the water pumped from the proposed slant wells will come from based on the work you've done?
Not the work I've done, but I perhaps on the work that others have done.
How did you accommodate the different boundary locations when transferring boundary conditions from your model to the North Marina groundwater model?
You're asking about the calculations or something more mechanical? I'm not sure exactly what you're asking.
Were there different boundary locations between your model and the North Marina groundwater model?
Yes, in the 2018 or I guess 16, I'm not sure what the proper name is here, but the hydrofocus model had different boundaries than my original model.
And how did you accommodate those different boundary locations when transferring them to the North Marina groundwater model 2022?
I didn't accommodate them. The changes were made to the boundaries of the North Marina groundwater model in the 2022 version.
Okay, and how was that done?
I'm if you're talking about mechanics, I think that that's really a question that should be directed at Dr. Ye. I just don't know exactly what they did to accommodate that.
Mr. Lilly, just because this is the first time this has come up and it's a panel cross, when a witness as part of the panel thinks another witness has more information, should that other witness participate, or do you wish, how do you want, this was the first time this came up and you had mentioned this early.
Right, right.
Private panel.
And the answer is we need to be flexible. I think in this case, it seems to be most efficient, unless Mr. Wilkins wants to go in a different direction. I think it's most efficient for Mr. Wilkins to continue his questioning of Mr. Durbin. I think it's pretty clear it doesn't make sense for Mr. Wilkins to ask Mr. Durbin any more questions about how the boundary conditions were transferred from his model to the 2022 North Marina model, because Mr. Durbin said we should ask Dr. Ye. So I assume at this point, Mr. Wilkins is going to move on to a different subject. Is that correct?
You are correct.
And then I'm not sure whether that was I can't see in my tile who made that request, but obviously when the cross-ex of Dr. Ye comes up, this subject may come up again. And if not, then that's potentially for my line of questioning or redirect. So we'll get there, but just not now. So Mr. Wilkins, you may proceed.
Thank you. And that was Mr. Osias, so your record could.
All right, thank you, Mr. Osias. We will get there, but let's not interrupt Mr. Wilkins' line of questioning now.
You're right.
I mean, I certainly want to know a lot more about that topic, as apparently you do too. So anyway, go ahead, Mr. Wilkins.
Do you have an opinion on whether there will be areas along the coastline in the project area where water levels will drop as a result of the slant wells that are beyond the capture zones?
And I assume, Mr. Wilkins, you mean groundwater levels. You said water levels. You should probably restate that question to include groundwater levels.
I will do that. Do you have an opinion on whether there will be areas along the coastline in the project area where groundwater levels will drop as a result of the slant well pumping that is beyond their capture zones?
Yes.
And what is that opinion?
I have such an opinion, yes.
And what is your opinion?
My opinion is that the groundwater level declines will occur outside the mixing zone or capture zone as a result of the project pumping.
Do you know whether the North Marina Groundwater Model 2022 shows there will be any increase in ocean inflows that won't be captured by the project?
I do not.
Are you familiar with any operating extraction barriers?
When you say aware, yes, I'm aware.
The question was, and I appreciate your answer. I'll just follow up. Are you familiar with any operating extraction barriers?
Wait. Mr. Wilkins, you have to be clear. Anywhere in the world or in this particular project area?
Oh, anywhere in the world.
Yes.
And which ones are you familiar with?
I understand that in Orange County, there's a hydraulic barrier. Thinking about it, I'm not sure whether it's a pumping barrier or an injection barrier.
Okay. Are you aware of any operating extraction barriers anywhere in the world that are effective at halting seawater intrusion?
I don't have any knowledge of that.
In the scenarios you simulated with your model, did you simulate any ways for the Salinas Valley groundwater basin to reach sustainability?
No,
And why didn't you simulate any scenarios where the groundwater basin would reach sustainability?
because that's not the output that was requested from me. So I ran the scenarios that were given to me.
If the Salinas Valley groundwater basin were to actually achieve sustainability through further pumping reductions or in lieu recharge, would land water gradients decrease or flatten?
Yes, they would decrease or flatten.
Those are all the questions I have for Mr. Durbin at this time.
Okay. Let me just make a note here. This is, let's see. So I'm trying to decide when to take a break here, Mr. Wilkins. Do you want to? And also, I've got to check my notes here. You are also cross-examining Mr. Leffler, right?
Correct.
Okay, so and you've gone about half an hour, a little more. So maybe we should keep going for a while and then take a break. Why don't you go ahead and start with Mr. Leffler, and we'll target to take a break around 10:30.
Okay, that works for me.
Okay, so Mr. Leffler again, and thank you, Mr. Durbin. If you can stand by, we're probably done, but there may be some questions we ask you to make a point on again. So please stand by and keep listening. And with that, Mr. Leffler, just a reminder, you still are under oath. Mr. Wilkins, you may proceed.
And for Mr. Durbin, just a reminder to Mr. Durbin that the city of Marina, I believe, has questions for him later this afternoon.
Oh, and yeah, and I know that's going to get to be late in the day for you, Mr. Durbin, but please don't go away.
All right. Good morning.
Mr. Moore will be defending this portion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Betts. So we'll go ahead with Mr. Wilkins, Mr. Leffler, and if necessary, objections from Mr. Moore. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Leffler. Can we please pull up CalAm 3?
I'm sorry, which one?
CalAm 3?
Okay, CalAm 3, all right. I get my papers here. All right, we have CalAm 3 on the screen. Please proceed.
Thank you. If we could scroll down to page 5, please.
We'll go to page 5.
Given our time constraints, Mr. Leffler, I'm not going to ask you all of the questions in this document, as there are a large number. But can you tell me, and I know we just skipped over it, what is contained here on page 5?
What and be clear as to which paragraph you're talking about, Mr. Wilkins.
And I guess maybe it would help to go back up to the first page just so he can identify what this section of his direct testimony contains. I think maybe page 2 would show that.
Okay, I may be able to help out here. Mr. Leffler's testimony on page 2 starts with listing the court's question 1 and the subparts A through G of question 1, and then his answers. And then on page 4, we have the court's question 2 and his answers, and that continues on to page 5. I don't think there's much dispute about that. So does that help?
No, what I'm just this is a summary of his testimony, and I just want to confirm that this is his summary of his testimony. That's all I'm asking. So,
okay, I'm sorry, I interject. Go ahead, Mr. Leffler.
Mr. Leffler, is this a summary of your testimony contained on these first several pages of your direct testimony?
Yes.
And did you write this yourself?
Yes, with perhaps some help with formatting and maybe some grammatical items.
All right. And given the time constraints, like I said, I'm not going to ask you about all of your summaries, but can we go to page 5, please?
Okay, we'll go to page 5 of Exhibit CalAm 3. And what paragraph do you want us to go to here?
And I want you to go to question 3, please.
All right, so that's paragraph 16. Go ahead, Mr. Wilkins.
And just preliminarily, can you explain what the term hydrogeological connectivity means?
Yeah, I'm discuss that in terms of various items, including the distance between the 2 points of interest and the water quality that's exists between those 2 points, among other items, and also including stratigraphy, the presence of aquatards.
And I understand what you're discussing, but can you define what the term hydrogeological connectivity means?
Well, it takes into account all those factors and that go into hydrogeology and in determining connectivity.
So you can't provide a short definition, is that what you're saying?
Objection, it misstates his testimony, I believe.
Well, just ask him, Mr. Wilkins, can he provide a short definition?
Can you provide a short definition of hydrogeological connectivity?
Well, I don't know if I can provide a short definition. There's a lot of factors that go into that in terms of both geology and hydrology. And I mentioned some of the variables there.
All right. In the middle of this paragraph, you testify that there is no hydrogeological connectivity between the areas from which CalAm proposes to draw water and the area of the 180-foot aquifer from which MCWD wells may extract water. Do you see that?
Maybe you should point out the line. You're starting at line 17. That might help him.
Yeah, that's true. Yes. Do you see that there, Mr. Loeffler?
Yes.
And do you have any qualifications to that statement that there is no hydrogeological connectivity?
Well, I think, in terms of the variables I looked at and described there, that's how I've made that assessment.
Are there any barriers that prevent horizontal flow of groundwater in the 180-foot aquifer between the area where CalAm proposes to draw water and the area of the 180-foot aquifer where MCWD wells draw water?
If you're referring to geologic barriers between those 2 points in the horizontal direction within the 180, I would say there are not geologic barriers.
Do you know if the modeling that has been conducted for the project at issue here shows there will be any drawdown at all at the location where the MCWD wells are located within the 180-foot aquifer?
I believe it shows that there would be significantly less than 1 foot.
If there's drawdown, wouldn't you acknowledge that there's hydrogeologic connectivity between those two areas?
I think you have to consider distance in that analysis. I mean, you could take a case from the Central Valley where 2 points are very far apart, like Sacramento and Bakersfield, and one might argue there's connectivity between those 2 points. So I think you have to consider distance, and also there's very poor water quality between those 2 points, and it limits how much you can pump the MCWD wells because they're going to draw in that poor quality water very quickly. So I just think you have to consider these other factors.
in determining whether there's hydrogeological connectivity, you have to determine these other factors, is what your testimony is, that I understand it?
Yes.
If we could scroll down to the end of this page. The next question 4 is, deals with whether it's likely the project would increase any seawater intrusion within the sub-basin interface zone, the 180-foot aquifer, or the Monterey aquifer, or any source for the MCWD production wells. Do you
You
see
want
that?
us to scroll to the next
Yeah,
page
you
here?
probably need to scroll on to the next page, yes, please.
Okay,
Do you
so
see that
what's your
question?
question?
Do you see that question there, Mr. Leffler?
Yes.
And is your response no accurate?
I think as I've written it there, yes.
Is there any qualification to no you would like to add?
I don't think so in terms of what I've written there.
So as your testimony, there won't be any zero seawater intrusion anywhere within the aquifers identified in the question.
There won't be any increase in the extent of seawater intrusion within those aquifers.
And is that what the question asks, in your opinion?
Well, yeah, that's how I interpret the question. If an area is already seawater intruded, then you're not increasing the seawater intrusion because it's already intruded.
Will the slant well pumping change seawater intrusion anywhere within these aquifers?
I'm not sure what you mean by change seawater intrusion.
Will it change the level of seawater intrusion anywhere within these aquifers?
Well, again, I don't, you're saying level. I mean, it's not going to exchange, it's not going to change the footprint or the extent of seawater intrusion.
Will it change the intensity of seawater intrusion anywhere within these aquifers?
So I think you're using different words. I mean, intensity, I don't know, I assume you're referring to TDS concentrations.
I'm referring to seawater intrusion, yes. And so you could define that with TDS chloride probably a number of ways. But yeah, so yeah, we could use TDS concentrations if you want. Will it increase the TDS concentration? I'll start this over. Will the project result in increasing the TDS level in the aquifers that you have answered this question for?
Yes, there would be an increase in TDS concentrations within the capture zone.
And do you know how much TDS would increase within the capture zone?
It really depends on the location within the capture zone. And actually that's, probably a question that modeling could be more specific on. But certainly in the near vicinity of the slant wells within the capture zone, it will increase the concentrations to, close to seawater.
Do you have an opinion whether TDS levels will increase outside the capture zone anywhere within the areas covered by this question?
That would probably be a very minimal increase if there is one.
And when you say minimal, what do you mean?
I can't put a specific number on it. Again, I think, that could be a question that might be addressed with modeling.
When you reference an area as already seawater intruded, what do you mean?
Well, I think I provided in my testimony some maps from the Monterey County Water Resources Agency, and they have used either 500 milligrams per liter sort of traditionally, and more recently they've used 250 milligrams per liter in terms of chloride. They show both of those now on their maps. And I think in other studies, and even some of the older studies in this area have used 100 milligrams per liter chloride. So I think you have to look at those different levels, and there's other analyses you can do to kind of assess the extent of seawater intrusion or what that looks like in terms of, say, stiff diagrams, and other analyses that you can do for that. But in terms of the Monterey County Water Agency mapping, I believe they're using 500 milligrams per liter and 250 milligrams per liter right now.
And when you testify in your direct testimony and rebuttal that an area is seawater intruded, how are you defining that?
I think as I said, those maps, I'm looking at the 500 and the 250 milligram per liter.
So, and Mr. Leffler, I'm just going to interject here. Excuse me, Mr. Wilkins, but if you have, I'll say, I don't know what we call it, water that has 500 milligrams per liter TDS in this area, based on the result of seawater intrusion, is the chloride concentration approximately 250 milligrams per liter then?
So I think the data I've looked at, and I think it's in one of the HWG documents. I think it might be a 2018 document. So we've looked at that, and I think what I recall, if my memory is correct, is I remember that 3,000 milligrams per liter TDS was the equivalent of 1,500 milligrams per liter chloride. And I think that 1,500 milligrams per liter TDS may have been the equivalent of 500 milligrams per liter chloride. I don't remember, if there's information in there about what 1,000 milligram per liter TDS would be in terms of chloride.
Okay, thank you. I'm beginning to realize that it sounds like it may not be a straight linear relationship then. All right, Mr. Wilkins, you may proceed. I apologize for interrupting.
When you say there won't be any further seawater intrusion, do you mean that the line that the MCWRA maps show as seawater intruded will not change?
So I recall that, for example, in the hydrofocus work, they looked at the line for the 500 milligram per liter chloride and did some modeling work, and their assessment was that line, either didn't move or would actually come back towards the shore with the pumping of the slant walls, or actually, to be perfectly precise, the way that modeling was done, it indicated that if there's ongoing seawater intrusion without the slant wells, that if they were operating, it may reduce the rate of inland migration. So it sort of retards the movement. So it either retards the movement or possibly pulls it back. But so yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
I'm just trying to understand, when you say there won't be any further seawater intrusion, what do you mean? And it sounds like what you're saying is it won't increase beyond what's shown on the MCWRA maps, which I'll be bringing up later, but I just want to understand what you mean.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm referring to. Yes.
Do you know whether chloride levels will increase in any areas within the dune sand aquifer from the proposed slant well pumping?
Well, I thought we already talked about that in terms of within the capture zone, although I would also add that it's a little complicated in terms of that perch mounted aquifer portion of the dune sand aquifer, and due to its its orientation in terms of the stratigraphy and its elevation of those water levels, that we probably wouldn't expect it to reach up into that perch mounted aquifer.
Do you know whether chloride levels will increase in any areas within the 180-foot aquifer from the proposed slant well pumping?
Well, again, I think we talked about that, but within the capture zone.
Can we pull up CalAm 83, please?
Okay, we'll get CalAm 83, exhibit CalAm 83. CalAm 83 is now on the screen.
Is it possible to shrink it so we can see the whole page?
Probably. Small and try to shrink it one more notch. There we go. Is that good?
Yeah, that works for me. Mr. Leffler, can you tell me what this document is?
Can we scroll to the very, well, let me.
Yeah, actually, if you can scroll down for Mr. Leffler so he can see what it is.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
So, yeah, that looks like one of my figures from, maybe that's my rebuttal testimony.
Yes. So this is CalAm 83, which was included with your rebuttal. Did you utilize the Monterey County Water Resource Agency maps to identify the extent of seawater intrusion within the Monterey and 180-foot, 180-foot subbasins for this map?
Yeah, this map is specific to the 180-foot aquifer.
Did you do anything else in terms of identifying seawater intrusion for this figure?
No.
Do you know how many wells the Water Resource Agency uses to map the seawater intrusion front in the area shown in your figure?
No.
Do you have an estimate?
I do not.
Do you know approximately how many wells are utilized were used to map the seawater intrusion from a portion of the 180-foot aquifer that is south of the Salinas River?
I do not.
What level of confidence do you have that the entire area shown to be seawater intruded in the 180-foot aquifer south of the Salinas River is currently seawater intruded?
Well, I think that this is a good, representation of that, notwithstanding that there may be small pockets of less saline water within this overall area.
And what is your opinion that it's a good representation based upon?
It's based upon this mapping. I've also looked at a lot of historical reports for the area. And so, based on that, I think this is a relatively good representation.
What level of confidence do you have that the entire thickness of the 180-foot aquifer south of the Salinas River shown in your figure as seawater intruded is currently seawater intruded?
Well, I think now we're getting into a discussion of a seawater wedge that typically will exist. You'll have an area where you have a wedge that forms where you'll have less saline water overlying more saline water.
Do you have an opinion on whether the entire thickness of the 180-foot aquifer in the Salinas, south of the Salinas River, shown in your figure as seawater intruded, is currently seawater intruded?
I'm sorry, I thought we already answered that question. Could you just repeat it?
I'm asking if you believe that the entire thickness of the 180-foot aquifer is intruded within the area shown in your figure.
Well, I think, as I said, at some point you have a seawater intrusion wedge, which, because seawater is denser than fresh water, you'll have less saline water overlying more saline water.
And do you know where the wedge you're referring to is located on this map for the 180-foot aquifer?
No, I mean, I can't say exactly, and that's also going to be, sort of a transition zone. It's not, or sort of a diffuse zone. You're not going to have a sharp front. I know I've, shown that maybe on some of my schematics, but I think I mentioned yesterday that's going to be kind of a diffuse zone. So I can't say exactly where that is and what the thickness of the wedge is, relative to this map.
Are you aware of any wells screened in the 180-foot aquifer within the Fort Ord cleanup area that have TDS concentrations below 1,000 milligrams per liter?
You're talking about within the upper 180-foot aquifer?
I'm talking about the 180-foot aquifer. So if it's upper or lower, both would be responsive.
So I believe there may be some wells that are screened in the upper portion of the aquifer, perhaps in the question mark area on this map.
Do you know if the Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Project well MW5M is in the 180-foot aquifer?
Yes, I believe that well has a very long screen that screens the entire thickness of the 180-foot aquifer.
And are you aware that the well location for MW5 is located approximately in the middle of the area shown to be seawater intruded in this figure?
Generally, yes.
And are you aware that the average TDS concentrations at MW5M have been approximately 676 milligrams per liter during the period it has been monitored for the Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Project?
Well, I don't know the exact figure, but that sounds like it's in the ballpark.
Are you aware that the average chloride concentrations at MW5M have been approximately 108 milligrams per liter during the period it has been monitored for the Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Project?
So again, I don't know the exact figure, but that could be in the ballpark.
Are you aware that the chloride concentrations on average at MW5M have met the drinking water standards during the period it has been monitored for the Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Project?
Which drinking water standards are you referring to specifically?
Well, in your testimony, you refer to drinking water standards. Can you tell me which ones you're referring to?
So I think I talk about TDS in terms of 500 milligrams per liter and 1,000 milligrams per liter as standards.
Are you aware that the TDS concentration on average at MW5M have met the drinking water standards that you refer to in your testimony during the period it has been monitored for the Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Project.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. And so, that's an example of where you could have a small pocket of fresh water. Although I would say with the screen being as long as it is, we really don't know if that water is coming from the upper portion of the aquifer or exactly where it's coming from. But it's just one point that, there may be a pocket of less saline water there within the overall zone of seawater intrusion.
Do you know how long the screen is at MW5M?
I don't recall the exact figure off the top of my head.
You have an estimate?
You could look it up, but I don't know, might be a couple 100 feet.
Wouldn't the fact that there's a longer screen at this location mean it's more likely to detect seawater intrusion, even if the only seawater intruded portion of the area was in the lower portions of the screened interval?
No, I think in general that, within the aquifer, there might be, slightly higher heads in the upper portion of it than the lower portion. So I would actually expect it's probably more representative of the upper portion of the aquifer. And I guess just in this overall general discussion, I just like to point out that, if a production well were ever put in at that location, it would almost certainly become saline, within a very short pumping time due to, salinity in the surrounding area.
Are you aware of any evidence such as monitoring wells that suggest groundwater in the area of this well, MW5M, is actually seawater intruded?
You're talking about other monitoring wells?
Or pumping wells? I mean, I'm trying to find out what evidence you have to support your last statement.
I'm not aware of specific nearby monitoring wells.
Are you aware of any pumping wells that have data showing that the wells are seawater intruded within the 180-foot aquifer in the area of MW5M?
No, I don't think there are any pumping wells in this area due to, being seawater well within the overall seawater intruded zone.
So based on the monitoring well results at MW5M that show chloride concentrations are below the Monterey County Water Resources Agency mapping criteria, do you still believe the groundwater in the area of MW5M is seawater intruded?
Yeah, I believe that, this area is generally seawater intruded. Again, there may be small pockets of less saline water within that zone.
Is it your opinion it's not possible to extract usable groundwater within the 180-foot aquifer in the areas that are shown on the figure here, on your figure here that are shown in green?
In general, yes. I think if you put in a production well that's screened through the 180-foot aquifer, that within a relatively short time, you're going to be extracting brackish to saline water, and so I think that generally would be expected to be the case. Certainly, it's even more so likely to be the case within the area that could potentially be impacted by the pumping of the proposed slant wells.
And you said there's some term. How long do you think it would take if you were to put in a production well here, a small one, let's say just like 100 acre foot per year or something, municipal well, or not municipal, but a single homeowner or something like that? How long do you think it would take for that water to become fully or unusable?
Well, I think you're talking about a very, very small well, a domestic well, which I don't know is particularly relevant to this area and situation. Certainly, if you put in a production well of any magnitude, I mean, I would think it wouldn't be more than, you know, a few days to weeks to a couple months at the very most, before you'd have saline water, and you would have invested all that money in a production well that you can no longer use.
And when you say production well, what amount of pumping are you talking about?
I don't know. It's hard to put a specific number on it.
Are you aware at Fort Ord they are extracting water from the 180-foot aquifer to facilitate remediation?
Yes, I'm generally aware of that.
Would you consider a change in concentration from 750 milligrams per liter chloride to greater than 5,000 milligrams per liter chloride to be an increase in seawater intrusion?
I think in that example you give, you're talking about an area that's already seawater intruded.
Under your definition, that's correct, but I'm asking if it increased from 750 milligrams per liter to 5,000, do you believe that would be an increase in seawater intrusion?
Well, I think we went over this before. You're not increasing the extent of seawater intrusion. You're talking about an area that's already seawater intruded.
You use the term usable groundwater throughout your testimony. In your opinion, at what TDS does water become unusable for agricultural purposes?
I think for most it varies by crop, and I don't know the specific numbers for a given crop, but in general, I think most crops you'd have to be around 1,000 milligrams per liter chloride or TDS or less.
Are you aware of any crops that can use water that exceeds 1,000 TDS?
I'm sure there might be some that could use, slightly greater.
In your opinion, at what TDS does water become unusable for industrial purposes?
But that's just a really broad question, and again, I don't think is particularly relevant to this case. I mean, obviously, there's a whole range of industrial uses one could, come up with, and I don't have specific numbers I could attach to that.
Do you believe there are any industrial uses that could use water that exceeds 1,000 TDS?
I'm sure we could come up with some.
Do you believe there's any industrial uses that could use water that exceeds 3,000 TDS?
Again, I'm sure you could come up with some, but I don't believe that's a very small fraction of any water that's used in this area.
Do you have an opinion on whether most drinking water is treated before it is used for human consumption?
Well, I know that, I won't claim to be a treatment expert. I know in general, you have to disinfect water typically before you serve it to customers.
Mr. Lilly, I'm going to change exhibits. So I don't know if this is a good time to take a break. I'm happy to keep going.
Okay, what is your estimated time to complete your cross-examination of Mr. Leffler?
How long? I'm about 40% of the way through my questioning of Mr. Leffler.
Okay.
How long have I taken so far?
Let me tell you where you are on time, so we know. Just a minute. Okay, so you started your cross-examination, Mr. Durbin, at 9:25. That was 35 minutes. And you started your cross-examination, Mr. Leffler, at 10 o'clock. So, and I interrupted a little bit, so we'll say another 35 minutes. So you've gone for 1 hour and 10 minutes. So you have about 50 minutes left in your 2 hours. Do you think you can wrap it up in that time?
I do.
Okay, let's go ahead and it's 10:37. We've been going all morning. Let's take a break until 10:50, and we'll come back then. And you may continue your question of Mr. Leffler. A reminder to everybody, for this break, you can turn off your camera and microphone, but don't log off.
I'm not supposed to log off. You still on? It shows that I'm off here.
Mr. Moore, I can still see you and hear you. I'll be there in a minute.
All right, we're just waiting for Mr. Leffler and Mr. Moore, and we'll get started.
When? Here we go.
Okay. Mr. Wilkins, you may continue with your questioning of Mr. Leffler, and as always, please let us know if you would like us to screen share any files.
Sure. Mr. Leffler, I'm going to change topics here and ask you some questions about AEM. Do you know what AEM is?
Yes.
Has any court or public agency acknowledged you as an expert in AEM technology?
No.
Do you believe you are qualified to testify as an expert in AEM technology?
I believe I'm qualified to testify on the results of an AEM investigation in terms of how that's interpreted relative to stratigraphy and water quality.
Do you have any training in either interpreting or collecting AEM data?
Now, I took a graduate course in hydrogeophysics, which included various surface geophysical methods, including resistivity. And so a lot of the principles and things are the same as what's used in AEM.
Do you have any professional experience in either interpreting or collecting AEM data?
So I'm currently working in a couple basins where AEM has been used and have started to look at that data. And relative to the work that's been done out there in terms of field work, and comparing those results to what we're seeing with other data. I've certainly looked at it a lot for this area in terms of the reports that have been done relative to the this project.
And in the matters that you're referring to, where you're doing it for other matters, are you actually doing the interpretation or collecting the AEM data?
No, I think that the primary comments that have been made by the HWG and myself aren't so much surrounding the collection of data itself and how that was transformed into the AEM cross sections. What we really focused on is looking at how does that data and interpretation in terms of stratigraphy and water quality compare to all the other data we've had that we've been collecting for the past almost 10 years now, I guess, in terms of field data and the various analyses that we've done, and seeing does this make sense? Is this a reasonable interpretation, final interpretation of this AEM data?
And can you explain what your professional experience is in actually interpreting AEM data?
I guess I'm not sure exactly what you mean by interpreting AEM data.
Have you ever interpreted AEM data for any matters you've worked on?
In terms of, have I been the one producing the AEM sort of profiles and cross sections themselves?
That would, I think, likely qualify, yes.
No.
Have you authored any comments or reports on AEM results and interpretations other than those involved in this matter?
No, again, like I said, we're in process of looking at that, and we'll be, utilizing and commenting on that and other projects that are ongoing.
And what other ongoing projects are you talking about?
Some work in the Central Valley.
Can we pull up Exhibit 79, please?
Okay, we'll get Exhibit Callium 79.
Go to page 61, please.
And this Exhibit Callium 79 is the rebuttal testimony appendix prepared by Mr. Leffler. And we go to PDF. I'm sorry, what page number is that?
61.
Okay. 61, which is text page 53, and it starts with section 6.8. Go ahead.
And I apologize. I've got the PDF page. So I guess we're gonna have to add 7 to this, I guess, to get to the actual page 61.
Okay, so you want text page 61?
Yeah, I apologize.
No, you don't have to apologize, especially because there are no PDF numbers at the bottom. But let's try 68 and see what happens. It might be one more. You want text page 61?
Correct.
Okay, so it's probably the next page here.
Yeah, this is it. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry. So this is, I guess this is text page 69. So, excuse me, I just want to make sure my record is clear. Ms. Mullen, are we on PDF page 69? If you can go off mute. 69, yeah, okay, good. So we're on PDF page 69, which is text page 61. Go ahead, excuse me for interrupting.
Thank you.
I'm trying to maintain a clear record here.
Appreciate that. Thank you. So at the top of this page, you say there is considerably greater uncertainty in the AEM data interpretation when 2 major variables are present that significantly affect bulk resistivity. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And what are the variables in the AEM data interpretation you're referring to?
Well, the 2 major ones I'm referring to here are lithology and salinity. Of course, there are other variables that affect the bulk resistivity, such as water content, or really whether you're in the unsaturated zone or the saturated zone. But yeah, I'm specifically here. I'm talking about lithology and salinity.
And do you have any examples in literature or anything to support your statement that there's greater uncertainty when there's variables in AEM data relating to lithology and salinity?
Yeah, I think I've come across a couple that talk about that, and that creates more uncertainty.
Okay. Can you tell me what those supporting documents or literature citations are?
I don't have them off the top of my head.
Do you know where they came from?
I believe they were journal articles.
Do you know what journal you read them in?
Yeah, again, I don't recall that.
When you refer to most cases here in this bullet, what are you referring to?
So really what I'm referring to here is in most cases, in most groundwater basins, the salinity or the TDS content is relatively low and relatively uniform, so that it doesn't have any significant impact on the bulk resistivity, which then allows you to focus on the lithology as the only major variable, after you account for the unsaturated zone, that's driving the bulk resistivity values that you're looking at. And in your interpretation, once you introduce salinity, then you have overlap, and you can have a certain lithology that has a certain resistivity, and the salinity may affect that depending on whether that lithologic unit is highly saline or not. And so now the resistivity is a function of two variables instead of just one. And so that, there's just more uncertainty if two variables can cause different resistivity values to occur.
And my question, I probably didn't artfully phrase it. What I'm asking is, you say most cases of data, AEM data interpretation, there's only one of those major variables. And what I'm trying to understand is, what cases of AEM data interpretation are you referring to?
Well, so again, like the Central Valley examples I gave would generally be, one example where you're not dealing with seawater intrusion.
And I guess my question is, when you say most, what is the number you're using as the divider, so to speak? Does most mean 50% to you? I guess I'll ask.
Well, I mean, it's hard to put a specific number on it. I would say generally there's probably more than 50% of cases where, they're not having major differences in salinity. That's a major variable in the interpretation.
And so what I'm trying to understand is, when you say the 50% most, whatever number you're using, how many cases are you referring to? Are you referring to the two from the Central Valley? Are you referring to 50, 100? I'm just trying to understand what you're referring to in terms of most cases.
Well, again, you can't put a specific number on it. It's just, I've looked at a number of studies and journal articles on it. And yes, certainly there's other cases where they've looked at salinity as a variable. But, again, my observation is in most cases, it's just focused on, you're not having major differences of salinity being, problematic.
And what I'm trying to understand here is, when you say most cases, are you referring to more than 10 that you reviewed, 50, 100? Just, can you give me any approximation?
No, I don't know. It seems like we're kind of nitpicking on a word here. I can't.
Mr. Lay, he's asked the
Put a
question
number on it.
2 or 3 times as well as he can. I don't think you should badger him. Was the same question over and over again.
Objections overruled. Answer it the best you can, Mr. Leffler.
It's difficult for me to put a percentage on it. I'd probably say it's more than 75%.
And my question, and I'm not trying to, I'm just trying to, 75% of how many cases that you've looked at?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just would be a little bit guessing. I don't know, maybe between 25 and 50 cases.
And those 25 to 50 cases, do you know, are those in California? Do you know?
Yeah, they were in different areas.
And do you have those AEM cases that you previously have looked at in your file?
I should have several of them in the file.
And do you know if all the AEM cases you've looked at that you're referring to in this bullet is information you've provided to your counsel?
My recollection is that I provided some of that information. I don't know if it constitutes everything that I've looked at over the past, 5 years or so.
Do you know what AEM practitioners do to reduce uncertainty in AEM acquisition data and interpretation?
So again, I don't think that's the kind of uncertainty that I'm referring to here. I think you're talking about the actual collection of the data. I'm just simply referring to the uncertainty of having two variables that can, are input to the resistivity values, the bulk resistivity values, and it's just creating a greater level of uncertainty than if you just have one variable that affects that bulk resistivity.
All right, if you could look a little further on down the page where it says the use of only 7 borehole geophysical logs for ground truthing. Do you see that? I'm looking for it here. I don't think it's on the screen yet.
Is it the very next bullet? The very next bullet?
Yeah, there it is. I scrolled right over. Hit my eyes.
Okay, well, we'll leave it up there. Go ahead with your question.
Do you see that bullet there, Mr. Leffler?
Yes,
And where does that 7 number come from?
that's what I recall was presented in the AEM report for this project.
Would it surprise you to learn that there were 36 geophysical logs that were used?
They did not present 36 geophysical logs and how they use those for ground truthing.
Do you know how many lithology logs were used in the 2017 and 2019 AEM investigations?
So my recollection, they claim to have used 300 plus lithology logs.
And do you have any opinion on whether you can use lithology logs to ground truth AEM?
I don't believe it's nearly as valuable as geophysical logs, borehole geophysical logs for ground truthing. You really have to look hard at lithology logs and how the wells were drilled, who did the logging. You have to make a judgment on how reliable that data is. And I did not see how they used that in a ground truthing way. I know that they plotted lithology logs or showed lithology logs on AEM profiles, but there was no indication of how that was actually incorporated into the ground truthing process. And it seemed to me that when I look at that, there were different lithologies within a very similar resistivity zone. So I didn't see how that was used for actual ground truthing.
And do you have any experience or knowledge about using lithology logs to interpret AEM data?
Well, again, I have general knowledge of that from this study and other studies I've looked at.
A little further on down, I think it's 2 bullets. One, just skip over a bullet. You say the interpreted AEM data provided a poor match to field water quality data. What do you mean when you say there was a poor match?
That the field water quality data for it was either, I believe it was either EC or TDS. I believe it was EC, electrical conductivity, that they were using. They did a comparison of that parameter value from the field versus what would be predicted by the AEM work.
And how would you define a good match in terms of AEM data?
Well, as they, I believe they showed on a chart in their report, what the value was for the field versus predicted from the AEM. And if you draw a line through sort of the middle of that plot where the values are exactly equal, and then you look at how those points plot relative to that line, it gives you a good indication of how well they match or don't match.
And what experience do you have doing that with AEM data?
I don't think that's just a standard way of comparing things. That's also the same thing that's used to compare water levels from a groundwater model. And you compare groundwater levels, measured and observed. It's a very common, statistical plot. It's pretty straightforward.
Is there any numerical or number you would assign for a good match?
Well, you'd certainly want to be a lot closer to 1 than say 0.5 for your R² value.
All right, thank you. On page 63 of the report, and I apologize, I think we're on 6, so we have to go 2 pages down, I guess.
Okay, so we're at the text page 63, which is PDF page 71.
Yes, and can you see where, scroll a little further down where you see the term rebuttal, and after that's what I want to ask a question about.
Okay, we'll scroll down to the middle of the page. Go ahead.
And you say the above statements indicate the following. And number 1 is Stanford had no role in evaluating interpretation of the hydrostratigraphy. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And what is the basis for that statement?
The basis for that statement is attending the presentations that were made on the AEM data, and in terms of what was presented by Ian Gottschalk. If I recall correctly, specifically, it might have been the presentation, the initial very first presentation that he made. And he indicated that Curtis Hopkins had a big role in evaluating the hydrostratigraphy.
Did you ever talk to Dr. Knight about the 2017 AEM study?
I believe I did have a conversation with her at one point.
Did she tell you she had no role in the interpretation of the hydrostratigraphy?
I don't recall the details of that conversation, and I think we need to put into context here this overall discussion here is my main overriding point is that this study this is the 2017 AEM study, which has often been presented as solely the Stanford study, with no mention of anyone else, and that this was just the Stanford study. And I think my main point here is that there was a lot of input from Curtis Hopkins, who I know was not mentioned as an author, but also AGF in this whole process. So I really think my main point here is that it's, if you want to refer to it as the Stanford AGF study or the AGF Stanford study with, assistance from Curtis Hopkins potentially, to reference this study, that's one thing, but to just refer to it as the Stanford study as if it was a completely independent work by them, in my opinion, is incorrect.
Can we move back to CalAm 3, please?
Okay, we'll post exhibit CalAm 3.
On page 6 of the PDF, and I think I have this one right this time.
Yes, the text pages of this seem to correspond with the PDF pages, which is convenient. Go ahead.
On question
line?
5, which asks whether the proposed project would lower the groundwater table or reduce storage space in any source other than seawater. And if so, that can be approximated. And you testified there will be no reduction in storage as a result of the pumping. When you say no, do you mean zero or nothing?
Well, I believe as I read that, it says it is not likely that any of the proposed draw and the rest of it there. So,
Is it your opinion that you answered no? And so is your opinion that when you say no, it's not likely, and that it's likely, I guess is what you're saying, there will be zero or no lowering of the groundwater table or reduction in storage space other than a source of seawater? Is that what you're I just want to clarify what you're actually saying here by using the term no.
yeah, I think what I mean here is that any reduction or lowering of the groundwater table or reduction in storage space outside of the zone of seawater intrusion will be negligible or very small.
Okay. And can you tell me what you mean by negligible or very small?
That's hard to put a precise number on it. I think, you're looking at a lowering of the groundwater table that's, I think far less than 1 foot.
Okay, we could scroll down just a little bit. I'm gonna ask you a question about 6. So I guess you don't really need to scroll. You can still see that there. No, I'm sorry. I'm not going to ask you a question about 6. I'm going to ask you a question about 7. You state there will be no change in the elevation of the water table of the groundwater extracted by MCWD due to the proposed pumping of the KLM slant wells. Do you see that?
Yes.
And is it your testimony there will be no, as in zero, drawdown at the MCWD wells that are screened in the 180-foot aquifer?
So again, I think what I'm saying there is any such change would be negligible.
So when you say no, is that synonymous with negligible in your opinion?
Well, I guess it depends on the specific circumstance.
Then I'll just keep asking that when you do that. So can we go to the North Marina groundwater 2022 North Marina groundwater? That's CalAm 89.
I actually just as I reread the question or the response there, I don't, in terms of change in quality of groundwater, I think I mean no in that context there.
Oh,
I think
I thought you had frozen, Mr. Wilkins, but it was
sorry.
just, do you want to move on or do you have a follow-up question here?
And I want to just clarify for the record that I think I was referring to question 7, and I botched that in reading my own thing.
Yeah, you were referring to question 7 and his answer was referring to question
Okay,
7.
all
So
right.
I think we're clear.
All right, so I just want to make sure that's clear for the record. All right, we can move along. Can we go to CalAm 89, please?
Okay, exhibit CalAm 89.
Are you familiar with this document, Mr. Leffler?
I believe so. Can you just, maybe can we shrink it down or scroll down so I can see
Yeah,
the date and
absolutely.
everything? Yes, that looks familiar.
Did you have any part in authoring it?
I reviewed this document.
Do you,
And I had several conversations. We had many HWG group discussions of this, the work that went into this.
do you remember how much time you spent reviewing this technical memorandum?
No, I mean, I don't recall how many hours I spent on it.
Do you have any estimate that you could provide? I don't want you to guess, but do you have any estimate roughly?
Well, I'm sure I would have spent several hours at least.
Can you describe any uncertainties associated with the North Marina groundwater model predictions?
Well, I think, with any groundwater model, you have uncertainty involved with it.
Are there some model predictions associated with the North Marina groundwater model 22 that you believe are more reliable than others?
No, I don't think I have an opinion on that.
Do you know if the reliability of the predictions in the model are the same across the entire model domain?
I don't have an opinion on that.
Do you have an opinion on whether the North Marina groundwater model 22 is more reliable than the transient version of the North Marina groundwater model 2016?
Yeah, I believe it would be considered more reliable.
Why do you believe it would be more reliable?
So I think a major, well, first of all, there was more calibration data. So there's more observed water level data collected since 2016 that could go into the calibration of this version of the model. And then there was, I think, an important improvement that was made in how the dune sand aquifer is represented. We added a layer to better represent that aquifer and the perched mounded aquifer portion of that sits on top of the FO-SVA aquitard. So I think there, that was, a good or an improvement in this version of the model.
Do you know who prepared the 2016 version of the North Marina groundwater model?
Yes, I believe that was Hydrofocus as part of the EIR effort.
And did you work with Hydrofocus on that model?
No, that was work that they did.
Do you know whether the Hydrofocus model from 2016 is based on any geophysical data that was unavailable to the hydrologic working group in its prior version of the model? And that's CalAmp 60 is what I'm referring to. That's the 2015 transient version.
I'm trying to make sure I understand your question. You're asking if the 2016 Hydrofocus groundwater model relied on geophysical data that wasn't available previously?
Yeah, well, not previously, but for the 2015 model.
Yeah, I don't recall that detail.
Do you know whether any of the models that have been prepared for the Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Project would show any increase in ocean inflows along any portion of the coastline in the project area as a result of the slant well pumping?
Yes, there would be an increase in ocean inflows due to the slant well pumping.
And do you believe those inflows would be limited to the areas within the capture zone?
I believe that's where the vast majority of the inflows, due to the slant well pumping would occur.
And when you say vast majority, what do you mean?
Again, I'm sure that's a question that could be answered by a modeling run. But I know the drawdowns are quite small outside the capture zone. And so there's not going to be much difference in the ocean heads versus the head at the coastline outside the capture zone. So I think it's going to be less than a foot. So I don't think that's going to generate a lot of ocean inflows in that area, but I don't have a specific number.
Can we go to CalAm 13, please?
Okay, we have exhibit CalAm 13 on the screen.
And do you recognize this document, Mr. Leffler?
Yes.
I think it's the same, maybe slightly different, but it's the same one you used in your slides yesterday. Isn't that correct?
I don't know if it's exactly the same, but yeah, it's kind of generally, yes.
Can you describe the salinity of the water in the perched mounted aquifer above the FOSVA on this figure?
Describe it in what terms?
In terms of salinity?
In terms of TDS?
However you're capable, if you can define it more than one way, that's fine. Just what would you describe the salinity generally?
I don't know specific values, but I think there may be values that range from below to slightly above 1,000 milligrams per liter TDS.
And are you aware of any monitoring well data that shows the values above the Fort Ord SVA exceed 1,000 TDS?
I think that there may be for MW5 shallow well.
And do you believe that elevated salinity level, if it does show that, it is based on seawater intrusion?
No, I don't believe so.
What happens to the groundwater after it flows off the FOSVA in this figure?
It flows off the western edge of the FOSVA into the underlying dune sand and 180-foot aquifer and mixes with the brackish to saline water in that aquifer.
Will any of the water that flows off the FOSVA in this figure be captured by the proposed slant wells?
Well, it would depend on the western extent of the FOSVA and where the capture zone boundary is located. I would also point out that wherever the capture zone boundary is located, it's going to intercept the incoming seawater that would otherwise flow towards the MCWD wells.
How does the introduction of water from the perched mounted aquifer into the 180-foot aquifer affect the salinity of water in the 180-foot aquifer?
There might be a very small dilution effect, but I think it would be quite small because the amount of water flowing from the perch mounted aquifer within the width of the capture zone is, likely to be a very small amount of water, and it would be mixing with this large body of water in the dune sand aquifer and the 180-foot aquifer.
And when you say small amount of water, can you approximate that amount in acre feet per year?
I believe my testimony has an estimate of that.
Do you recall that?
If I recall correctly, it was less than 100 acre feet per year.
And do you recall how you calculated that number?
It was a basic groundwater flow calculation, looking at hydraulic conductivity, gradient, width, and saturation depth for the flow.
Does the introduction of fresh water into the 180-foot aquifer affect the position of the saltwater wedge you've depicted in this figure?
In terms of the amount that we're talking about, it would likely have a small, a very small, if any, effect on that.
Could a reduction in freshwater flow into the 180-foot aquifer from the overlying perch aquifer affect the position of the saltwater wedge you've depicted in this figure?
Well, I don't think you can just look at it in that context. If we're talking about if the slant wells are pumping and somehow the capture zone were to pull in some of that water flowing over the edge of the FOSBA, again, it's also intercepting all that incoming ocean water, and the net effect of that is going to be that it's not going to it's going to mitigate the effect of any water that's captured from the perched mounted aquifer and result in the wedge, likely not moving. And possibly it could have a beneficial effect as, hydrofocus evaluated in the EIR.
Could it also cause the saltwater wedge to move further inland?
So are we talking about a reduction in the perch mounted aquifer flow when the slant wells are not pumping?
No, when the slant wells are pumping. Could it also cause that wedge to move further inland?
No.
All right, I heard somebody else say no. Was that somebody in your room, Mr. Leffler?
No, I'm in a room by myself.
Okay, I heard it over the screen, probably somewhere else. So there's no scenario that where the slant well pumping could cause that seawater wedge to move further inland due to a reduction in flows from the overlying perched aquifer. Is that what you're saying?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
There's no scenario where a reduction in freshwater flow from the 100-foot aquifer from the overlying perched mounted aquifer could cause the position of the seawater interface wedge depicted in your figure to move further inland.
And Mr. Wilkins, I don't think that's a fair question, because he already said that you have to look at if you're looking at the effects of the slant well pumping, you have to look at the combination of the effects of the slant well pumping on the perch mounted aquifer flows and the seawater intrusion. So I don't think you can ask him to split out one from the other when he already testified they're both going to occur at the same time.
Yeah.
So unless I'm missing something, why don't you try to rephrase your question?
Yeah. I'm trying to get both those, Mr. Lilly, and I'm probably doing it inartfully because this is a little beyond my area of expertise. So I'll try one more time, and if I get it wrong, we'll try again. I'm almost done here.
Okay.
Could a reduction in freshwater flows from the 180-foot aquifer from the overlying perched aquifer affect the position of the saltwater interface depicted in your figure under any scenario where the slant wells are pumping?
Well, I don't know what you mean by any scenario. I mean, I think that's just an overly broad question. I think in what I've evaluated that I think is a realistic amount of water that could be flowing from the perch mounted aquifer over the edge, the western edge of the FOSVA with the slant wells pumping. It's my opinion that that won't change the position of the seawater intrusion wedge, or it might have a slightly beneficial effect.
I will move on. If the seawater intrusion wedge were to move inland, as depicted in your conceptual model, what would happen to the salinity of the water in the 180-foot aquifer at the MCWD wells that are depicted in the figure?
Well, it would have no effect on the deep aquifer wells that constitute about, I think, on the order of 70% of the total pumping for MCWD. It would have no effect on the 400-foot aquifer well. It would have no effect on the portion of the MCWD wells 29, 30, and 31, which are reportedly screened in the 180 as well as the 400. So it would have no effect on the 400 portion of that well. But if the seawater intrusion wedge moved inland, depending on where how far inland relative to where those particular wells are located, it could increase the salinity. And I think, in fact, when you look at the pumping of those wells, you can see that when you pump more from those wells, you get a higher TDS. And so you can see that the pumping of those wells is seeming to pull that wedge a bit closer. Keeping in mind that wedge is not a finite line. There's a diffuse sort of front there at the wedge. It's a sort of a zone, if you will.
Under a lower landward gradient in the 180-foot aquifer, would the proposed slant wells capture more or less fresh water flowing off the FOSVA from the perched mounted aquifer into the 180-foot aquifer, in your opinion?
Well, so again, it would depend on the specific scenario and which gradient we're referring to, and it would depend on, specifically where exactly the western edge of the FOSVA is located.
How would a reduction in the landward hydraulic gradient in the 180-foot aquifer affect the position of the capture zone boundary that you've depicted in your figure?
In a general sense, the capture zone boundary would be further inland with a lower gradient until if you revert until the point you reverse it, and if you ever had a seaward flow, then we're talking more about mixing zones, and then that gets pushed back towards the coast.
If the capture zone extends further inland from the proposed slant well pumping, would the proposed slant wells capture more or less fresh water flowing off the FOSVA from the perched mounted aquifer into the 180-foot aquifer, in your opinion?
I thought you already asked that question. But again, it depends on the specific scenario that we're talking about in terms of the gradient and where that puts the capture zone and exactly where is the western edge of the FOSVA.
What has caused or is causing seawater intrusion observed in the 180-foot aquifer in the Monterey subbasin, in your opinion?
I'm sorry, the question is, what is causing seawater intrusion in the 180-foot aquifer in the Monterey subbasin?
Correct.
Lower groundwater, the groundwater levels are low enough inland such that it's inducing saline water to flow into the basin.
And do you know what's causing those inland gradients?
Pumping from inland wells.
Would you agree that the landward movement of seawater would not have happened if it were not for the drawdown created by the pumping?
Yeah, if there were no pumping in the basin, then presumably you would not have seawater intrusion.
Will the proposed slant well pumping cause drawdown in the 180-foot aquifer?
Yes, there will be drawdown near the coast in particular, where the slant wells are located, related to the pumping of those wells.
In the areas outside the capture zone where there would be more drawdown from the proposed slant wells, would the pumping cause the groundwater to be degraded?
I'm sorry, could you, within the capture zone?
No, in the areas outside the capture zone where there would be drawdown from the proposed slant wells, would the pumping cause degradation of the groundwater where the drawdown occurs?
I think I don't expect there would be anything that would be significant outside the capture zones. It would likely be negligible. Again, I mean, might be something that could be addressed with modeling.
That's all the questions I have at this time.
Okay, let me just see where we are. Okay. 10:40, 50 minutes. So by my numbers, and I'm sorry if I'm being nitpicky about this, Mr. Wilkins took 120 minutes, exactly 2 hours. That's a pretty good prediction. And I certainly, I will say, I think Mr. Wilkins' cross-examination was very efficient and to the point. And frankly, also thank you, Mr. Loeffler. I thought your answers were very efficient and to the point. So this was very useful for me. And I think we covered a lot of important material in a short amount of time. So I do conclude that Marina Coast Water District has demonstrated good cause for exceeding the 2-hour limit. They had 2 hours today, and I think it was 10 minutes by Ms. Muzine yesterday. So I am going to allow, I'm losing track here. Mr. Brochard, I think you want to ask questions of Dr. Ye, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and you estimate approximately 1 hour for that. Is that correct?
I'm hoping.
Okay, well, I understand. It's hard to hit it right on the nose the way Mr. Wilkins did with his time estimate. But I am going to allow you to have 1 hour of questioning of Dr. Ye. And if it turns out it takes more than that, I am going to ask for a clear showing of good cause and what topics you need to do. But if you can proceed in a similarly efficient manner as Mr. Wilkins has, and I hope Dr. Ye will be able to as well. I think we can cover that, and then we will that will complete Marina Coast cross-examination, and then we will shift over to City of Marina. So let's go ahead. It's 11:45 now. I think it's time. It's a logical time to take our noon break. Unless anybody has any objection, I think we should probably start at 1. I do want to make sure we wrap up both Marina Coast and City of Marina's cross-examination today. And as I mentioned this morning, then it appears pretty clear that my questions and potentially my staff's questions we will conduct tomorrow morning. So hearing nothing else, let's take a break until 1 p.m. And as a reminder, for the lunch break session, you need to log off completely and then log back on. You use the same Zoom numbers, but we, for whatever reason, and I don't understand the IT behind it, but we do have a separate recording session starting at 1 p.m. So everybody needs to log off and then log back on at 1 p.m. Thank you. I'll see you all then.
Thank you, Mr. Lilly.